Welcome to a tutorial video on JavaScript and Ink. In this video, I'm going to talk about calling Ink functions. Now, in the previous video in this series, I talked about getting and setting variables. We used the variable state proxy interface to look at or even change variables. We can do a similar thing with Ink functions using the same JavaScript API. Before we get into that, though, let's look at some Ink code and talk about how this works. So we see a similar code layout that we saw in the previous video. We've got a similar thing we've seen throughout all of this, the pizza interface, choosing dinner, story. We also see the same variable up here at the top, variable name equals Dan, and we see the same he turned to me what should we eat, and then the name of that variable line, 8 right here. What's new though in this video is this function at the very end, line 34 through 36. We see a function, change name, and a parameter a. Then we see name, the global variable, will be set to the local scope of a. So whatever we pass to the change name function will change the value of the global variable name. Now I mentioned that we can use functions like we can change variables in Ink through the JavaScript API. And we see the same thing we've seen throughout all of these videos. Loading the ink.js module, loading the file system, loading the JSON file, loading the contents of the JSON file into a story. The new change right here is on line 13. As part of the story API, there's also a function called EvaluateFunction. What this does is it calls an Ink function and allows us to pass it data. We can also get the results of that function if we want as well. In this case, though, we're just passing it an array of values. The first of which right here is the string Steve. So we call the function by name, EvaluateFunction, the name of that Ink function, and then whatever values we're passing to it as an array. In this case, an array with a single entry of the string Steve. Now this works exactly like the previous video. However, instead of changing that variable, we're going to change the variable through an interface built into Ink through calling its function to do that. This changes up that dynamic slightly, but there are two different approaches to doing this. We can get or set variables, or, as this video and code shows us, actually create the interface in Ink, call those functions, and then not care about what Ink does with that, knowing we just call those functions, pass it data, and do something with that. So that's what this does right here. We use the evaluate function, line 13, to call some Ink function and pass it some values. And again, we can actually get the return data if we really wanted to as well. But coming back to the same example, we run continue to get the first chunk of the story. It was our first date and we had made dinner plans. Then we run continue a second time to get that next chunk. That moves us from this right here, this line, into this line right here. And we know then, when we run this, we see what should we eat, Steve, producing the same outcome as the previous video when working with variables, but we changed the dynamic of how we do that. Now relying on Ink to handle that for us, instead of dealing directly with variables, we just say, okay, there is a function in Ink, we know what this does, we will pass it a value, and we won't care what it does on that side. This is part of the way of thinking through working with these two different systems. We're working with JavaScript and we're working with Ink, but we can start to, on both sides, build functions that talk to each other, building a central interface between them. Not caring what Ink does with its own variables, just writing functions to do that, and then writing functions on the JavaScript side that talk to the Ink functions. Calling functions from both sides to build a central interface. Thanks for watching.